The Diamond Witch by Fox Cellars. Prelude. The events of which I'm about to speak of, amazingly horrific as they might seem, are the dissembled proceedings to which I should favor. I favor over a much different and distinctly more tragic narrative. A narrative that is so unthinkable I shall be forced to omit its telling entirely. For not just my life, but my soul I would give thee only to allow her life and spare one's embroidered memory of the blood-soaked vision of our cruel certainty. It might seem to some rather sad to deprive you of the truth, but in another life one could conceivably be witness to this. And it is to my heartache I am no longer capable of the faithful summary. A long time now I've been damned to torment in this infernal abyss. Not just reliving the horror of my past in this lowly vibrational realm post-exaltance, but running through inexhaustible possibilities of alternate outcomes. And in this infinite echo, my consciousness is forced to hopelessly understand the testament of destiny. In all the lives a soul as damned as mine can have differing conclusions, but they are all threaded with the same nefarious theme. So it is, I rebuke after dreadful reflection that I have discovered one such outcome that I can choose to accept, if only to be given the chance to relive it. My life had just this one, barely admissible, albeit terrible outcome that my mild imagination in death could produce. Any other unseen path was hidden from my apperception, for it was my journey to experience this end. My hindsight in afterlife would allow me to see the dour, frightening path of which I am about to tell you. For this would be the tale of which my Minar survived. My love for thee can be measured in small part by the ghastly eternal pain in which I suffer the empirical monsters who suffer for her soul. I shall begin in the days of my clearest and most simple assessments of the prospects of my life. As a young boy, I lived in the small village of Rhinebeck, just outside the town of Poughkeepsie, in the heart of New Netherlands. I was the son of a Dutch diamond dealer in the Hudson Valley and a radiant optimist in the romantic delights of perpetual sentience. At such a time, I would have wide eyes open for the notion of compassion, forgiveness, selflessness, and of course love. But only for a flash, and not past this innocent moment might I be so able to recollect. It was often, before and after such a time, I would make trips with my father to Westchester, or just as often to the great city of New York. There he would meet with Dutch and German diamond dealers. My father was a man of consistency in his convictions, compassionate and a believer in the honest life. It's as if he was impassioned for greatness, and he would go to great lengths to ensure my mother and I had a life draped with the modest luxuries. He wanted very badly for me to learn the family trade and carry on with it after he was gone. That is why I was made to shadow him on each trek to the city. That is why he was determined to use his own moral conviction as an example. And that is why he expected of me tremendous resolve. I enjoyed these trips, but I don't think I ever really felt the same lust for the trade as my father did. Although the trade itself did not interest me, it was the fervor in which my father spoke of the stone's beauty. The wonderful tales and legends of diamonds would always capture the imagination of those young and purest of heart. The diamond was a symbol and source of great strength, thus transforming all whom possessed them into bold and daring icons in all their endeavors, he would say unto me. The tales of the most beautiful and sought-after stones I could do nothing to forget. Often my father spoke of the diamond called the Mountain of Light, which rested in the Taj Mahal as part of the throne to the Mongol Emperor Shah Jahan, whose name meant King of the World. Other stories included that of the Great Tavernier Blue, the legendary violet stone that emerged from India, speculative conjecture, but all were sourced through reputable diamond traders he had met in his old world travels from Amsterdam to Goa. Though smaller and with less infamy, my father's favorite tale and subject that consumed him was that of the Adamus Oculi. An absolutely perfect and seemingly pure stone with a drastically unique. It was a gray morning in the early October when I lost my sight. An apparent slow-moving day. I had grown accustomed to the meandering ways of the valley folk. But as our shop bell began to swing, all occasions followed in a state of deliberately slow and measured observation. The faint, dull ringing of the clapper and the bell came to me unhurried, allowing a heightening of all conscious senses. One could perceive the kindly warmth of a marvelously elegant spirit entering the shop. My responding motion came as slow as time appeared to me, and I turned to see what could be shining upon me with such charm. I could not make out the face, for her eyes were shielded by a delicately decorative hat. It was obvious to anyone the woman who'd caught my sight had been shopping at Decker Hats. Donald Decker was a marvelous hat designer across the street, and his uncanny creations were distinctly recognizable. With removal of reason, I watched in great amazement as she floated across the room. I caught a glimpse of her wildly hazel eyes. Though brief, the infinitely engrossing vision is still fixed within my recollection. "Good day, madame," I began. Her radiance spoke on her behalf and gestured for me to assist her as she gently placed her elegant soft hand on my arm. Her touch calmly healed my disquieted bodily tensions, releasing deep inner aroused torment. A therapeutic experience one describes by saying, "I was struck anew and unburdened of considerable unrest." I was without constraint in her presence and patiently awaited her suggestion. "I simply love the shimmering stones you have displayed. I wonder if you might show me some of your finest," her soft, soothing voice sang to me. I immediately retrieved a pillow to display diamonds, all cut in precisely the same fashion, which is a rarity in a collection this large, for stones are often cut to suit each specific stone's needs. All modest in size, however glowing with a crisp shine. "This is certainly a pristine assortment, and the shape is wonderfully perfect," she declared. "That is the cut you are referring to, madame. They were cut so as to return and scatter light from above. If the gem is pure and colorless and cut just so, then the prismatic display of colors results in a soft glowing fire. Do you think that you might have 22 of these?" As she spoke, she pulled from her dress pocket a handful of gold coins, all in all road, on the full moon and feasting night of this month. "I would be dearly obliged if you would come. If you bring the stone with you, I will pay you handsomely for your troubles." "Ah, the Damascus estate. I would love to be invited to your stately manor. I will have a magnificent centerpiece for your jewels. However, might I ask how you are having these stones set? My father and I have exceptional skills, and we are the only jewelers in the Hudson Valley," I wondered. "I will not need you to set these," she declared proudly. Her statement perplexed me, however her aura of calm confidence gave no reason to question any apparent lack of logic. Her dress flew wide and weightless as she spun away and out the door. After she was gone, I found that during all the commotion several things were amiss. I did not get the name of the woman with the hazel eyes. I could not seem to place for the life of me where I had left the gold coins. As I gathered myself, an added distraction came upon me. If I was to regard correctly, it seemed the hands to our clock showed a fallacious contingency. She had been in my shop for what felt like over an hour, but when I studied the time, not more than 30 seconds had passed. I must have fiddled about the inside of our clock for hours trying to determine why it had stopped during her visit. The night of the ball at the Damascus estate came quickly, and I can remember the ride into the woods along the desolate Marandola road, a bleak underground to the rest of Rheinbeck. The estate was close to Kipsbüren, a hamlet just along the Hudson River. Her property was neither part of Kipsbüren or Rheinbeck, but nestled out of the sight between the two. Though a very large property, it was not an outlet to go from one village to the next. As I followed the full moon ahead, I felt imbued with a certitude aimed at my beloved. A late summer ride at dusk brought on a refreshing gust from the forest and crops of our neighbors to the east. To the west, off in the distance, I could see the Hudson River from atop the hills. Provoked by the river air from the field to the east was the smell of Abernathy's apples, a hopeful prelude to the feast to come. Amidst the excitement, I was surprisingly well placed in the twinkling moment. Because the nearby Iroquois were still at odds with each other and with the Dutch and French, traveling alone was always dangerous, so traveling in groups was always advisable. Therefore, I stayed on high ground. Fort Orange was still very far off to rely on for protection, and the long arm of the king did not stretch so far as to create a haven for any of the colonies here. The Dutch settlers had purchased much of this land from the Iroquois, who were friends to the Dutch. However, my horse was ever so weary of the severed woodland outlet ahead. Reckless as it were, my horse was trusting of my intentions, and for whatever reason knew it was soon to join the company of others in the stable of the hazel-eyed lady. The last lowly grove was a well-put end to our anticipation and concern. Before we came out of the thicket and into the field, a curious-looking owl could be seen at the edge of the forest. There was a feeling of old enchantment in the night as the bird's bright eyes watched our approach. I was compelled to bring this lovely child the largest diamond I could find. In fact, the stone in my pocket had been stolen from my father's private collection. I paid no mind to the repercussions of what this might do to his trust or to the claims of where the stone had vanished off to in his absence. I was more concerned with impressing the mysterious woman, not in procuring a sale for the family business. All the same, I was certain not to create was already underway, and I arrived at precisely the moment I hoped I would. Presently there were several wealthy settlers from surrounding villages, many of whom I did not recognize. A Gentile servant graciously accepted me into the manor, and just as he announced my arrival, another noble servant declared the entrance of our host to the audience of guests. Her name was given. The Lady Corinne Laveau Belladore of the Damascus estate, it was declared, and her entrance left us awestruck. Never had I allowed myself in all of my life to participate in the ideals of such a romantic notion. However, it was confirmed from my previous encounter that I was enamored, and it was from first sight. This was an unexpected event given my lifelong preventive instincts to avoid love. My body remained fixed as I beheld her motions about the room. Her eyes subtly shined upon me as she attended to her guests. As she went on, I witnessed a remarkable act of suggestion. She would whisper to each of her guests from behind them as she pressed on to her next caller. Many of them would move willingly in my direction and offer me a variety of services, from unpaid debts to interest of my services, or to that of offers of kindly favors. My change in popularity was simply astounding. It made me quite patient in awaiting her consideration, and I learned many new things about my neighbors. To me, it was not witchcraft, but it was extraordinary the way the Lady Corinne commanded the people around her. The night continued, and the ball was a wonderful success. Corinne found time for each and every guest, save only myself. Even so, I was fully entertained by the gratification I received from each visitor who hearkened upon my serial of tales and parables. Patience was a simple task with respect to my growing curiosity every time a new guest presented themselves to me with a relishing advance. I felt as if I was hosting my own party within her home. Eventually, the guests removed themselves from the estate in an appropriate fashion, and I was left alone with Corinne at a seemingly reasonable hour, regardless of whether or not it was or it was not. It shocked me to see the privacy her servants exhibited towards Corinne. Once everyone had exited, even though my remaining latency was noticeable. It was as if I was the man of the manor. All romantic pleasantries aside, our meeting still had a transaction unfulfilled. Several nights later, maybe almost a week later, amidst the waning autumn moon, disembogued an unseen fog that smelled of blood. Upon such a night, my Lenore darted along a forest road near town. Hooded and frantic, she carried with her a basket of flowers and made haste to the nearby home of the minister, where inquisitors were convening. Breathless and shaken, she intruded without so much as a knock. Her intrusion was not regarded as insolence when she reported her findings to the committee. She was returning from her family's home with a bundle of cyclamens from her garden. This was a flower I do recall she spoke of, and it was due to all of the troubles with foreign plants. But the cyclamens were native to Dutch counties of the New World and grew remarkably well in snowy climates. "God help me for what I've seen," she panted. "A traveler, I have seen his body scattered about the forest." Lenore had found the body of Dismas Skelton lying bloody and torn in the mire alongside the road to Rocoq. Dispatched immediately, the committee's findings coincided with the reports of my frenetic wife. The group was led by a gaunt yet tall and vigorous old man. His puritanical hat sat darkly over his cadaverously pallid face, and his stare could pierce your soul with brooding, almost red eyes. Chorbishop Oslof Purston Thorn was ordained by the Roman Catholic patriarchs for his continued success with cleansing much of Europe of demonic influences and restoring faith to each and every village, city, and town he approached. His remarks and requisitions were indubitable, and even the slightest contradiction was assailed with the utmost and immediate berate. It was clear that all in his presence were thoroughly intimidated and their very opinion undeniably manipulated. I dashed through the snow in the brumal night air to Lenore. I could see the low flicker of our candlelit house through the trees, and as I came closer, my intuition became uneasy. As I entered, I heard the malevolent giggles and speedy footsteps of a devilish goblin. The room was covered in blood, and Lenore's pink and purple cyclamens could be seen trampled about the house. Half cast in shadow, Lenore lay motionless and torn in the entranceway to our kitchen. I moved toward the horrible scene as I did, and I noticed her basket lying empty on the floor. Just then, a glowing pink and white light stepped from behind her tiny basket. It appeared as if an extraordinarily small child was holding none other than the Adamus Oculi. It was much smaller than I had imagined, but ever so clear as provision into the hereafter. At first, I thought it was another one of the cyclamens, but soon enough I could see it was glowing a bright white pink. With unnatural speed, the tiny figure jumped to the windowsill, flushed open the panes, and turned to smile at me. As the moonlight hit the side of its face, my wondrous eyes befell what briefly appeared to me as the face of a doll. As soon as the startling nightmare had begun, it was off into the cold night. I scurried about frantically through the thick of the snowy forest, chasing its giggles, always finding that the sounds were in fact coming from somewhere else. I was quickly lost and disoriented, as it left no footprints in the soft, wet, snow-covered terrain. After what seemed several hours, I turned to make my way back to the house to see to Lenore, knowing she was most certainly dead. I came upon a road where I could finally see what was in front of me. Just then, a group of men on horseback came pulling up to me. It was too late before I realized I had no voice to beg for their help. "Nathaniel Albrecht Steinhood, you are under arrest for the murder of Lenore Duchamp Stanhood, your wife," announced Corps Bishop Thorne. Just as assuredly the declaration came, the council seized my exhausted body.